We'll give a few minutes to get the attendees populated. Looks like they're coming in. All right, looks like we're holding steady on the attendee list, so I'll get started. Welcome everyone to our Housing and Homeless Virtual Town Hall. This is the second of our town halls that we had. We held one last week for districts 1 and 4. Tonight's is for districts 2 and 3. The purpose of this town hall is to educate our public and residents on affordable housing in Elkgrove and homelessness, and kind of dispel some of the myths and misconceptions that go along with the topic. Before we get started, I'd like to kind of go over a few ground rules. The meeting is being recorded, and by default, any participant, their line is muted and video is turned off. This is pretty typical of our town halls. And then to enter your questions, use the question and answer the Q&A feature down below. You'll see it on the lower toolbar of the Zoom environment. Put in your question, one question at a time, and we'll do a question and answering period at the end of the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. I will give some advice. Allow the presentation to run its course because it'll answer a lot of people's questions. But we will still entertain questions at the end of the session. Also, comments will be noted for the record, but we won't individually address comments, so that we welcome that as well. So just going over tonight's agenda, we went through opening remarks, and the background obviously is low income and affordable housing in Elkgrove and defining that, as well as homelessness. And then of course, as stated, we'll have at the end our question and answering session. So unfortunately, the mayor had a conflict, so she has a recorded video we'd like to play at this time. So we're queuing that up as we speak. Shane, are you getting this?
Yeah, I'm about to share screen now. Had a little trouble teeing it up.
Good evening. This is Elkgrove Mayor Bobby Singh Allen. I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening and welcome our elected officials and community leaders that have joined us this evening. So many of you this past year have contacted us regarding affordable housing and homelessness. Tonight, we are pleased to provide you with an update. Tonight's Affordable Housing and Homelessness Town Hall is our opportunity to share with you, our community, on what the city is doing to address these needs. But before we begin, I want to share this important video with you that will introduce you to some of our unhomed residents that the city has been working with over the past year. We hope to tackle these important issues together with compassion and human dignity. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. As we're going to get the video teed up as stated by the mayor. Give us a few seconds here.
Over the 16 years that I've worked with the city of Elk Grove, I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of people experiencing homelessness and hear their stories. The stories are all different, but what often strikes me is how it's just one thing that tips a person into homelessness. It could be a health problem or an injury, an unanticipated car repair, a divorce. Once you become homeless, it can be really, really hard to climb out. For example, our recently opened apartment complex. We have 96 units and we got 28,000 unique lottery entries for those units. But we were able to house 10 homeless households in that apartment complex. Nearly all of the people that we worked with would have been happy to share their stories with you. But here are just a couple from folks who have been recently housed.
My name's Cassandra, and I have been homeless for, it was almost 3 years.
My name is Richard, and I was homeless for 5 years.
Bad marriage and a situation that was unsafe. So we decided to leave, and not a lot of preparing was able to be done. Being given resources, but lists that were outdated, and just chasing whatever lead you thought, but they were always old or non-existent even. It was just people thought you could be doing more, and there wasn't anything else I could be doing because I kind of fell in a gap with being disabled and, you know, not rehabilitatable at the moment kind of situation.
I just wanted to stay working. Like, I just wanted to get a job and stay working, and that's what I was doing when I was homeless. I was working. So I just wanted to make sure that I held on to that and didn't let that go, because that's the main thing that I had, really.
For us, having an apartment has been amazing, to have our own home and knowing that it's something that you can sustain. Having a place like Well Run, just where it's on your income and you know that nobody's going to kick you out next month. You know, you're not going to not be able to pay your rent because it's worked within your fixed income. That's huge for me.
People that aren't homeless view homeless people as at the very bottom of the social structure. There's some people that want to help, and there's some people that just don't want anything to do with you.
All right. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. At this time, I'd like to introduce Councilmember Hume from District 2 to say a few words.
Thank you, Darren. First of all, thank you all who have taken time out of your busy schedules to be here tonight and participate. This is such a big issue. I mean, right up there with economic recovery out of the pandemic. Homelessness is certainly a serious issue, and affordable housing is tied with that. You know, homelessness, as we just learned in that video, is not monolithic. And so there are a lot of things and contributing factors that go into what makes a person homeless. But the reality is that it's not always a situation of not enough beds. That's certainly exacerbated, and we're trying to fix that issue. But there's root issues as well that we have to be compassionate, as the mayor said, but take meaningful approaches. Sitting on the Affordable Housing Committee, you know, we authorize loans for the city to move forward in order to have some of these projects built. And, you know, affordable housing runs the gamut from very low, which could be 30% of the AMI or average median income, up to 80% of AMI or average median income. And so when the median income in Elk Grove is you know, $80,000 to $90,000, you know, somebody who's at 80% AMI is in the $60,000 range for, you know, a household of four. So it's not all homeless individuals, but certainly trying to change the trajectory of people's lives is an aspect of this. And so I hope you learn a lot from the presentation this evening and from the various things that the city staff was going to go over. We've tried to do some innovative things here in the city, as well as just the traditional methods to try and tackle these issues. But it's a humanitarian issue, it's an economic issue, and it's frankly an environmental issue. And so it's something that we need to figure out how to get our arms around. So thank you again for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Hume. From District 3, we have Councilmember Spees on the call. Okay,
thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Yep.
I'm here. Yes, thank you. I don't really have a whole lot more to add than what the mayor and Councilmember Hume said. But what I do want you to know is that we have heard that people are concerned, right? We have heard that people want compassion, but they want things to be addressed as well, right? And so this isn't something that we're not paying attention to. We're absolutely paying attention to it. We're doing our best to take care of people, to give them dignity, to restore their dignity, to get them in homes. And so as you listen to what goes on tonight, please know that all of this is done with a desire to give dignity to all. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to ask them here. And remember that that the conversation doesn't have to end tonight. So if you have a question or concern, please reach out to staff, or please reach out to us, and we'll get the answer from the right place. So thank you very much. Back to you, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Councilmember Spees. To kick off our presentation, I'd like to introduce our Housing and Public Services Manager, Sarah Bontrager. Sarah, you've got the floor.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Bontrager. I'm the Housing and Public Services Manager for the city, and I'll be kicking off our town hall presentation tonight. But joining the presentation will be officers Jennifer McHugh and Chris Cahill. They are our two homeless outreach officers through our police department. We also have James Lutz, who's the Park and Golf Operations Manager from the CSD, and Rosa Tapia, who's our Code Enforcement Manager. And among the many folks at the city who touch affordable housing and homelessness issues, these are just a few, but all have really great information to share tonight. So I'll start with a little bit of background. Often when we start talking about affordable housing and homelessness, people aren't really sure what that means. What is affordable housing? Who qualifies for affordable housing? And so I like to start off with some definition of that. Affordable housing is primarily serving low-income households. And as Councilmember Hume alluded to, there's sort of different levels of low income. At the extremely low income level, we're looking at people who are earning about 30% of the area median income. That's under $30,000 a year for a 4-person household. And that affordable housing cost for a 3-bedroom apartment or house would be a little under $700 a month that household could afford. There is not any housing available at that level in Elk Grove that isn't subsidized. Similarly, for very low income, about $45,000 a year and a little over $1,100 a month, very difficult to find. At the low income level, we're talking about folks who are earning $72,000 a year, 4-person household. $1,800, you might be able to find a few places in Elk Grove at that rent, but the majority of housing in Elk Grove is still out of reach for that population. And then sometimes when we talk about affordable housing, we talk about moderate income, and that would be that 81 to 120% of area median income level. That's almost $110,000 a year of income. And those households can afford about $2,700 a month in rent. That is possible to find in the city, although at that rate, it's still hard for those households to purchase a home. So in terms of low income, the folks that fall into those income ranges are often really essential to our community operating functionally. So extremely low income, we see food service workers, folks who work in retail, who may work at Target or at our grocery stores, home health care aides serving people with disabilities or seniors often fall into that category as well. At the very low income level, we see preschool teachers, folks who work in banks, security guards, landscaping, sometimes medical assistants fall into that category as well. And then for low income, EMTs and paramedics, mail carriers, administrative assistants, auto mechanics, people who do maintenance on buildings. And those are all really essential occupations. Our community would not function smoothly without those folks. And so we need to make sure that our community has options for them to live as well. So over the last 10 years, Elk Grove has gotten increasingly unaffordable, as has the state and to some extent the nation. Our median home price now in Elk Grove is now over $525,000. A low-income household could afford about $250,000, and there are not any homes available at that price point. Even the photo shown here of a condo complex, most of those units in that complex, even the one bedrooms that we're seeing, are still beyond the reach of a low-income household. The situation on rent is a little bit better, although we have seen rents go up in the last year. The median rent in Elk Grove is now just a little under $2,000 a month. For a 2-bedroom apartment, we're seeing market rate complexes have rents of $1,800 to upwards of $3,000 a month. And so that would be affordable generally to a moderate income household, but not to lower income households. We've also been seeing our housing has very low vacancy rates. We had low vacancy rates going into the pandemic, and things have not gotten better during the pandemic. And so at our affordable housing complexes, we're typically seeing vacancy rates of 0%. And at the market rate complexes, 5% is considered kind of a healthy market, and vacancy rate, we're seeing no more than 2% in the market rate side of things. Our recently opened affordable housing project had 96 units, and we got more than 28,000 unique lottery entries for that, which really just underscores the level of desperation and need out there for affordable housing. When we opened the previous complex, about the same number of units, and it was 2 to 3 years before, we only got 1,600 lottery entries for that. So the problem has gotten much worse even in the last couple of years. So there are a number of factors that really drive that unaffordability. We've seen really strong demand for housing in our community. Elk Grove has always been a great place to live. And clearly people are recognizing that, including some folks from the Bay Area and from other places in California who are moving here for lower cost of living. At the same time, we're seeing costs to build homes go up. Construction labor and materials costs have increased pretty considerably. Land costs have gone up, as well as development fees. And we have a real shortage of construction labor. During the last recession, we saw a lot of folks who worked in the construction industry exit because home building stopped. And those folks found other jobs, and they stayed in those occupations. And so when we started constructing homes again, they didn't come back. And we don't have enough skilled labor now to construct the housing that we need. So what that results in, when material costs are high and land costs tend to be kind of high, and we don't have enough labor to build all the houses that we need, is that developers will build the thing that's most profitable. And that tends to be large lot single family homes and larger homes. So most of the homes that are being built in Elk Grove right now are over 2,100 square feet, which is considered a larger home. And you can see from the photo here, this is a new home that was for sale not too long ago. And that's a little smaller than our average house, but $657,000 was the base price for that home. So in terms of whether we're constructing the housing that we need, we look at our housing on an 8-year period, which is the period that's required by the state. And so each 8 years, the state gives us an allocation of how much housing we would need to meet our population's needs over that 8-year period. And so over 2013 to 2021, we had a housing allocation in 4 different income categories. Our total low-income housing need was about 3,500 units. We built 8% of what we needed there. And so we had quite a bit of unmet need. We did a little bit better in terms of building moderate income housing. We met 20% of the need there. All of that was built before 2017. So in the last 4 to 5 years, we have not seen any new housing built that was affordable to moderate income households. But we did see a lot of housing built for the above moderate income level. So market rate housing in that price point that's currently upwards of $500,000 and usually upwards of $600,000. We built almost twice as much as the state said that we would need. So going forward, we got a new allocation for the 2021 to 2029 period. And in that period, we saw that the need for low and very low income housing actually increased. And so we got an allocation of about 4,300 units that we needed to plan for in that time frame. And the state requires us to plan for those units by zoning high density residential land. Generally, that would be 20 or 30 units to the acre. And that land would support an apartment complex. It could support a condominium development. In some cases, you could see like some townhomes or row homes in that development, in that density range as well. And then we also got an allocation of moderate and above moderate income units, and we can meet that requirement by zoning at any residential density. And typically when we do this, when we look at this, we have plenty of land zoned in the city to meet that moderate and above moderate income need, but we do not have enough land to build to allocate for the low and very low income land. And so we have to do some rezoning for that. So as I mentioned, we update our housing element document every 8 years as required by the state. And that has 2 primary things that go into that. One of them, as I was mentioning, is zoning enough land to meet the housing needs. And then the other element of it is really looking at some policies and actions that we can take over that 8-year period to try and encourage housing development at all income levels. And so we have those 2 components. Zoning land such that if an affordable housing developer wanted to come in and build, they would have some options of land to pursue. So there'd be enough multifamily sites zoned that they would have some land to look at. And then the policies and actions to encourage it. But nothing in that process actually requires that the city build housing. We must zone land and we must have policies that support housing development. But what ultimately gets built is really up to the market. And so we zone the land. Those sites could develop as market rate housing. They could develop as luxury condominiums. They can develop as apartment complexes. They could develop as affordable apartments or affordable ownership opportunities. The city does not get to say what use those multifamily sites are as long as the development proposed meets the density range. So we adopted our most recent housing element back in May, and we did a lot of rezonings. Some of you may have seen our mailers or participated in our webinars through that process to accommodate new apartment construction. And so at this point, what we're doing is looking at some of the policies that we need to implement over the next several years, including doing a parking study to make sure that our parking requirements for apartment complexes are set correctly, looking at what we can do to promote fair housing and housing equity, and doing some education and outreach around affordable housing issues, and some neighborhood engagement. So affordable housing, people often have some misconceptions about affordable housing and what it looks like. We currently have 18 affordable apartment communities in Elkgrove. And many of them you would not recognize market rate housing. We have a total of about 2,300 units and 4 complexes that serve seniors only. Complexes range in size. Our smallest one is 64 units. The largest one is 222 units. That's a senior complex. And we have we have at least 4 additional projects that are pending, and I'll highlight some of those in a couple slides. So all of the affordable housing complexes in the city are professionally managed. They all have on-site property management, and at least one of the property management staff lives on site. Typically, it's the overall, like the head property manager or the maintenance supervisor that lives on site. And we also require the complexes to have amenities. Those amenities can vary depending on what the project's population
Hey, Sarah, pause for a second. We like there.
All of them actually have swimming pools, grounds. Our senior complexes. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. You glitched out for a second there.
Sorry about that. Okay.
Why don't you restart that slide?
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. So our affordable housing complexes are all professionally managed. They all have on-site property management offices, and at least one of the property management staff lives on site. In most cases, that's the community manager, so the head property manager or the maintenance supervisor. And then the complexes are all required to have amenities as well. Some of the amenities can vary by property. Sometimes senior properties have different amenities than family properties. All of our family properties have swimming pools and playgrounds, and community rooms, laundry facilities. Some of them have like bocce ball courts or other park and open space amenities as well. There are a lot of misconceptions around affordable housing, and I'll take just a couple minutes to cover some of the most common ones that I hear. The first of which is the concern that people who live in affordable housing don't work, that they're somehow taking advantage of the system to pay very low rents. And that's not actually true, with the exception of our senior complexes where most folks are retired. At our family complexes, most adult residents are in fact employed. A surprising number of the residents of our affordable housing actually work for the school district, typically as like instructional aides or bus drivers or food service, that sort of thing. There's also often some perceptions that affordable housing is Section 8 housing, and that Section 8 housing is undesirable. And that is not the case. In fact, most affordable housing is not Section 8 housing. Section 8 vouchers, there's about 11,000 of them countywide, and those are offered through the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency, and they can be used anywhere in the county. Most of our affordable housing is not rented by Section 8 voucher holders. And we see that the Section 8 program in our community is a mix of single family homes and apartment complexes. So another common myth is that anyone can move into affordable housing. And the truth is that the qualification process for affordable housing is actually pretty complex. When folks apply for it, they need to provide a ton of documentation to verify that their income meets requirements. They also need to be able to pass a credit and criminal background check. Most of our properties, just like market rate housing, want to see that the tenants have 2 to 3 times the monthly rent in income, so that they can feel confident that the tenants will continue to pay on the property. And then another myth when we talk about zoning land is that once we zone land for high density residential, it's always developed as affordable housing. And we don't get to decide that. The market sort of decides that, what developers are interested in. When we zone land for high density residential, it can be developed as market rate housing or as affordable housing. And it could be developed as rental housing or as an ownership product. And we see some townhomes or condo developments get built on our multifamily zoned land as well. So our role in affordable housing development is really twofold. In most cases, affordable housing gets a city loan. It's hard to build it. There's a lot of funding out there, but most of the time it requires developers to cobble together multiple funding sources. And one of those is typically a city subsidy. And so in those cases, we do have discretion on which projects we want to fund. And we'll occasionally go through a request for proposals process, collect a number of applications from developers who are interested in doing projects, and we select a couple of those to move forward. And so in that case, we have a lot of discretion. However, if there is no city funding requested, the city's review is really much more limited. We can only apply written objective development standards in that case. And so what that means is that the same standards would apply if a developer was proposing to build $2 million luxury condos, as would apply if a developer was building a project that would serve exclusively people experiencing homelessness. Our standard has to be the same. It can be setbacks, it can be height of buildings, but it can never be related to the population to be served by the project. And often we have some really defined timeframes that we have to meet, and so projects need to be deemed approved or denied within 60 days. And the reasons for denial are really, really quite limited there. We are seeing something that I didn't think that I'd see in my career, which is that there are some projects that are coming forward at this point that are affordable housing or have an affordable component that do not ask for city subsidy. And so in those cases, we review them for development standards, and if they meet our development standards, then those projects can go forward. So I'll now share just a little bit about the affordable housing projects that we have planned in our community. Kicking off construction pretty soon here will be the second phase of the Gardens at Quail Run project. The first phase opened earlier this year. The developer plans a second phase that's 108 units. It's a family project that is kind of across from the Walmart on Bruceville. And that will go to construction probably in November. We also have a project that's down in our Southeast Policy area, so at Bighorn and Bilby, and that will be 126 family units over 2 phases. The first phase will be 64 units. And the developer for that project, which is featured here on the photo, they're currently applying for funding for that project. And then we also have a project called the Lila. That would be our largest project. They're proposing 294 family units. And that's up at Laguna and Bruceville, kind of behind the Outback Steakhouse there. And they are applying for funding as well. And then we have a new project type, really innovative project called Cornerstone Village. And that makes use of a portion of the Light of the Valley church site on Bruceville, and carves off a bit of the site to build a new housing project that would have 84 units, including 21 units for adults with intellectual or developmental disabilities. Recognizing that for a lot of those folks, they're cared for by family and siblings who might themselves be aging and getting to the point where they're unable to provide that care. And so helping folks to move out into a really service-rich environment. That project is also applying for funding. And then we have several other projects that we're aware of that are in the conceptual phases. Whether or not they'll move forward is really dependent on whether they can secure outside funding. So now I'll switch gears a little bit and I'll just sort of kick off our homelessness discussion with some information on what we talk about when we talk about homelessness. And so there are a few different definitions, some a little bit more flexible than others. In general, homeless means someone who doesn't have a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And that could include people who are staying temporarily with friends or family, or who are living in motels. But for tonight's discussion, we're really focusing more on what we call the literally homeless. And that is folks who are living in a place not meant for habitation. So effectively, that would mean people who are living outdoors or people who are living in vehicles. And when we talk about literal homelessness, we're not including people who are living in motels or with family or friends. And so to kind of tie homelessness back to housing affordability, what we see is that when we have a strong economy, as we started to come out of the last recession, we saw that households had more confidence. And so folks who may have been doubled up, families living with a parent or children living with adult children living with a parent, felt more confident, felt like they could afford their own apartment or their own house. And they moved apart, formed new households. And we also didn't build a lot of housing during that period. And so they moved out into existing housing, which caused the vacancy rates in our housing to fall. And when vacancy rates get lower, there's more demand for housing. And so landlords tend to raise rents. And they also can apply higher standards. So where they might have selected someone previously with some credit issues, they now don't have to. And so they look for folks who are less risky. And ultimately what that means is that renters, especially renters who may be experiencing homelessness or who may just generally be low income, have some serious challenges. They can't afford rent anymore because the rent is too high. And also they may not be able to meet the landlord's higher standards. So they may not have very good credit. And they may not have 3 times the rent and income. And so they don't get selected as tenants and eventually could fall into homelessness as a result. So now I'll turn it over to Officers McHugh and Cahill to go over a little bit about the status of homelessness and the police department's approach.
Thanks, Sarah. My name is Officer Chris Cahill. Me and my partner, Jennifer McHugh, are assigned to the problem-oriented policing unit here at the Elk Grove Police Department, and we specialize in homeless outreach. We work hand in hand together, contacting different subjects that are literally homeless in the city and applying whatever resources or things we can do to help their situation. So the status of homelessness in Elk Grove in 2020, we had approximately 317 people experiencing homelessness within Elk Grove. They were staying outside in tents, their cars, parking lots, sometimes just in the eve of a business at night where they'd pack up their stuff in the morning. There's quite a few people that sleep in their cars that both me and my partner do not, they're not on our radar because they go to their jobs during the day. We never really see or receive calls for them. They pretty much have said they stay in Elk Grove because they feel safe. They have different connections, such as family, jobs, the schools, our businesses, and they feel much safer than some of the other metropolitan areas or communities around Elk Grove. The status of homelessness in Elk Grove. On average, the city receives 165 calls for service related to persons experiencing homelessness each month. That can encompass welfare checks or miscellaneous issues that passerby see. Many times those calls are just regarding a welfare check, to check on somebody's welfare, make sure they're safe, make sure that they're getting shelter, food, water, and such. Police, code enforcement, public works coordinate on 140 encampment cleanups in 2020. That's not necessarily 140 different camps, but maybe chipping away at some of them, which later in the presentation we'll discuss some of our legal issues with the encampments. So the city, doing to address homelessness, we have a homeless services navigator that works hand in hand both with me and my partner, and also with different aspects of the city. She's on contract through the city with Sacramento Self-Help Housing. She meets with different individuals and finds out their specific needs or reasons, if they have any sort of income or whatnot, and she's able to steer them into different housing programs, give them a ride for ID vouchers, hotel vouchers, social security cards, and whatnot that will help assist them in getting back on their feet. We have both me and my partner are full-time through the city addressing the homelessness issues. We also work hand in hand with our mobile crisis support team, which is just got expanded to an additional team, which consists of a police officer, a specially trained police officer with a family clinician, that they go out and they contact different people that are in different states of maybe a mental health crisis. They help support them in not just a law enforcement role, but get them maybe some of the services or mental health different programs that they need. We also help with the transitional housing that the city owns and helps manage in hand with our homeless navigator. And we have partnerships with multiple different private non-government groups, such as the Elk Grove Heart, Sacramento Self-Help Housing, the Elk Grove Food Bank, and other nonprofits. And we work hand in hand also with the County of Sacramento.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Officer Jennifer McHugh. Some enforcement limitations that we deal with in our job is case law. We have the Martin versus Boise case, which was a 2018 decision by the U.S. Court of Appeals from the Ninth Circuit that ruled enforcing any ban on public camping on public property violated the 8th Amendment, unless we can provide a shelter bed. Right now, we don't have any shelter beds to offer any of our people experiencing homelessness, but it's something that we are taking very seriously and going to be working on in the near future, hopefully in partnership with the county. So that is why we get a lot of calls about homeless encampments in the same location. And a lot of people wonder why we're not moving them. It's just because our hands are tied right now with case law. So instead, we can't just go out there anymore and say, pack up, move on. Now we do a lot of outreach. We see what they need, what we can do to help them with, and do what we can to keep the area clean. We have an incentive program that we go out every other week to the homeless encampments, and we clean them up. So we're trying our best to work with them and keep the community clean. Governor Newsom also passed a state law saying we couldn't move any of the homeless encampments during COVID. The idea with that was we didn't want a lot of people moving from camp to camp, spreading COVID. And also we wanted to keep an eye on them, make sure if they did have any symptoms, we were able to put them into some of the motels provided. And we had a lot of nonprofit groups that provided food to them daily. Some of the common challenges that we face, I would say in Elk Grove, roughly about 80% of people experiencing homelessness have a mental health or substance abuse issue. They kind of go hand in hand. That is very challenging because we can't force anybody to take their medication and force them to go to the hospital to get the treatment they need. And also years ago, Prop 47 made drugs a misdemeanor. So back when it was a felony, a lot of people we were able to take to jail and get drug diversion. So that's a huge challenge for us because our hands are tied with a lot of the new laws out there. A lack of trust. It's taken, I've been doing this for about 7 years now, and it's a lack of trust I saw out there in the beginning. And I just want our homeless community to know that we're there to help them, not just to go out and take them to jail and write them a citation, but we want to figure out what we can do to get them the help they need to get back, into the community. And also the stigma of homelessness is hard. A lot of people think that, they're dirty, they're lazy. And so we're dealing with a lot of those challenges. And then of course, a lot of our homeless community refuse resources. We offer them shelter beds. If the women's shelter has a bed open in the county and we have a spot open, a lot of people refuse it because they don't want to leave Elk Grove, and they give us a million other reasons why they can't go. So that's very frustrating, but it can take months, years, but when we do get that final success story and someone's willing to go, it's the best feeling ever. And then of course, Sarah talked about lack of affordable housing and limited shelter options. Our law enforcement approaches, Chris and I go out every day, all week. We provide outreach services to anybody out on the streets. We go out into our encampments. We check on them weekly, see what they need, what we can do to help them. We deal with a lot of quality of life issues. We get calls, there's a homeless encampment behind my house, or there's somebody loitering in front of my business. So we go out to all those calls. We take them very seriously and we handle them immediately because we know quality of life is what people want in Elk Grove, and we're here to help and do what we can to make everybody feel safe. And we also monitor movement of camps. And like I said earlier, we go out there weekly. Chris and I have a very good idea of every single camp here we have in Elk Grove. We monitor them. And we just work really hard to keep our community safe and clean. And our ultimate goal is just to get as many people experiencing homelessness back on their feet again and into shelters. And I know I talked about our public property issues. And with that, I will turn it over to Rosa Tapia with Code Enforcement.
Thank you, Officer McHugh. Good evening, everyone. Rosa Tappy, I'm your Code Enforcement Manager for the City of Elk Grove. I just want to take a brief minute to discuss the approach between the code enforcement approach, I should say, between private property and public property. So specific to public property, when code enforcement receives a report of a homeless camp, one of our first steps is to partner with our homeless outreach officers to assist them with the issuance of some sort of noticing, either a trespass notice or a cleanup notice, and whatever the need is for that specific call. The Elk Grove police officers essentially take it from this point on to offer any type of services or resources, engage the individuals, and eventually coordinate a cleanup with our public works city division. Specific to private property camps, what we generally see on private property is what we refer to as an abandoned camp. What that means is it's generally an unoccupied camp with an accumulation of garbage, just junk and debris left behind. What we do in these instances is that we issue a notice and opportunity to correct to the landowner, allowing a correction period for them to address the garbage problem on their property. If the scenario is that the camp on private property is still occupied, we encourage the landowner to seek assistance for any trespassing concerns that they may have from the police department. Individuals on private property are also contacted by our homeless outreach officers so that they can be offered resources or any services that they may be open to accepting. So this is just a very, very quick overview of how the city addresses public property versus private property from a code enforcement standpoint. And now I'll turn it over to James Lutz with CSD.
Thanks, Rosa. Good evening, everyone. James Lutz, I'm a Park and Golf Operations Manager with Cosumnes CSD, overseeing the Park Ranger section. As we talk specifically about our parks, you'll see our numbers are a little bit lower, but this still affects the whole community in one way or another. Now, what the Cosumnes Community Services District is doing to help individuals and families experiencing homelessness, we'll start with our park rangers roles or approach. Their goal right now is education and support. And so we do daily monitoring of camps, following up with active camps. This last year in 2021, we had 11 camps on CSD property where we were following up and providing support, whatever way possible. We also have they respond to our hotline calls, which we have our 24-hour park maintenance hotline that comes through, and those get dispatched to our park rangers as well. This past year in 2021, we had about 40 calls to service regarding individuals experiencing homelessness, specifically in our parks. So again, not as high, but it's still affecting the community as a whole. One of the big things we've been started about a year and a half ago is our park rangers have been working really closely with Elk Grove PD when it comes to any of the individuals in our parks and identifying them, working with them, providing assistance in whatever way we can. Then we'll talk about our park operations. We have our staff out constantly monitoring parks. Their main role is to take care of a CSD parks infrastructure and really the maintenance. But if they're out and about, they'll identify, monitor camps, they'll report back to our park rangers where we can then get in contact with PD and we can jointly make an effort to assist the camps. One of the other things is providing assistance with the weekly cleanup program. We do go out weekly on the active camps, and we'll provide trash bags, gloves, disposable gloves, and we'll do pickups on a weekly basis of those trash. The goal is to really help keep, if we have the camps on site, to really help keep them clean for the neighborhood as much as you can. You'll see it. This is an encampment that was in one of the creeks back behind Jones Park, and in a couple of weeks we were able to get it completely cleared out. The cleanup process, the camp is still there, but the cleanup process was really effective in getting it cleaned up. So the debris was out of the way. And then our last is our fire department. They're going to respond to any emergencies and non-emergency calls for service, really with if it's fire suppression and safety or anything medically based, they're going to respond like they would anywhere else in the city. If they do run into a situation where they need to make referrals to our fire prevention or the law enforcement, they'll make those calls as well. But the key with our Cosumnes CSD Fire is they're going to treat it like anybody else in the city and really do what they can to help out in any way possible. So that's just kind of a quick overview of what our Cosumnes CSD approach is, and we'll let it go from there.
Great, thank you to all of our presenters for sharing tonight. We are now at the portion of our presentation where we are going to move into question and answers. So please go ahead and enter your questions. I'm seeing that there are a couple of them in the Q&A function. We will answer as many as we can. If we're getting a lot in here and it looks like we are going to run out of time for some of them, we do have the option of having staff answer them in writing. So you can check the questions tab to see if your question's been answered in writing if it isn't answered by staff live. So I will stop my screen share now and our questions moderator can get us kicked off.
All right. As Sarah stated, and as I stated at the beginning of this presentation, by default, everybody's mics are muted and videos are off. So the way to be engaged in this as far as questions and answers is through the Q&A tab located at the bottom toolbar of the Zoom environment. So let's start with the very first question. Is there any plan to have non-police first responders? Well, I'm sorry, that's not the first question. Let me go up to the first one. Elk Grove has fallen significantly behind in the development of affordable housing. What is the plans to get things back on track and make up for this ongoing shortage? There is clearly a community need. How can we help?
So I'll take that one. It is true that we have fallen behind on affordable housing. That's consistent throughout the region and throughout the state. In fact, looking at the last 8 years, we've actually done better in the city of Elk Grove than many of our other regional counterpart jurisdictions. But meeting 8% of our need is still really, really short. And so at the state level and at the federal level, there are a lot of ideas as to how we get things back on track. The state legislature has passed a number of laws to try and encourage the development of accessory dwelling units, to try and make it easier for existing single-family homeowners to add units or make their homes into duplexes to try and address the shortage. As well as just providing quite a bit of new funding to help us with this. Unfortunately, even with new funding, it still takes time to get the units constructed. And I would say in terms of how the community can help, if you have a unit that you are renting, or if you have the ability to build an accessory dwelling unit on your property and rent it, that's a great opportunity to work with a lower income household to get some extra income for your household as well. At sort of a broader level, not everyone has that ability. Volunteering with some of our civic organizations that are devoted to housing and homelessness, like the Elk Grove Homeless Assistance Resource Team or Elk Grove Heart, is a great one. We have an organization called Uplift, which focuses on ending the cycle of generational poverty. And that serves a lot of lower income households. The Food Bank is another great organization. And also just supporting affordable housing when that comes out, when projects are coming out. So many projects will face some neighborhood opposition, and it's less frequent that folks come out in support of affordable housing. And so that's an opportunity as well.
Thanks, Sarah. Our next question is there any plan to have non-police first responders for people experiencing homelessness? Sometimes a badge and a gun can unintentionally escalate a situation.
I believe I can answer this one. I don't know if there's any plan the city has for having non-sworn or unarmed representatives contacting some of the homeless individuals or people experiencing homelessness. I know both Jen and I, we many times our encampments are well off the beaten path and in kind of remote sections of Elk Grove and creeks and such. And so the kind of the safety, our safety comes first, and the safety of the citizens, the safety of the subjects that are experiencing homelessness. We do not necessarily have had that issue. We work on building relationships with these people as being a huge goal of ours, and then kind of our law enforcement services, whether or not they are on probation, parole, or they have warrants or whatnot, kind of take a back seat. If subjects need to go to jail or there's a criminal component that needs to be addressed for everyone's safety, we address that. But for the most part, we build these relationships and we're able to get a understanding or a level of understanding to help people and also build trust and know that if they're in a spot that's causing conflict within the community, discussing that with them, a lot of times they're very understanding and they know they need to either move to a different spot or they're seeking respite and they would like to go to a center for the day or whatnot. And we have general a lot of cooperation. I believe that.
Chris, I can also add a little bit with regards to the parks. Our park rangers are not sworn officers. They're not peace officers. They're really, the goal is to educate. And like Chris was saying, in the parks, they will reach out and kind of create a connection with the individuals. If they're a known individual, then we will work with Elk Grove PD, but the goal is to really reach out to them first before we go that approach.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Next question, where would you normally instruct people experiencing homelessness to go?
I believe this question came up during mine and Jen's when we were speaking. It matters. If we got a call for service and they're in front of a business and the business is calling due to loitering, I would discuss that issue with the subject that, hey, the business doesn't want you here right now. They just requesting maybe you move on. Or if you go down the street, or do you need a ride somewhere? Do you need water? We use some of the respite centers within the city and county of Sacramento that offer them some medical services, shower, clothes washing options. And we find a lot of cooperation with those services, the food bank, clothing, and whatnot. So we instruct people to go where they need things. It matters, it's a case by case. It's not a one size fits all. A lot of times, everybody that we come in contact with, so for multiple contacts, they receive the business card and the office hours for our homeless navigator, so they can meet with her. And going back to kind of the first question that I answered, that breaks down a lot of barriers. A non-law enforcement person, which they can be honest with about some of their struggles, they can go a long ways. And I understand that, they may not be 100% honest with me with what their problems are or what they need or what they don't need, but we can point people in several different directions. So that's where I would instruct people to go is I have multiple different places for them to go and directions.
Thank you, Officer Cahill. Next question, are officers trained regarding the resistance of people experiencing homelessness to go into shelter? Shelter is temporary, and with no available affordable or supportive housing, people eventually time out of shelter and are sent out the revolving door back outside. Over time, unhoused community members lose faith in the interventions being offered.
Okay, I'll try to answer this one. We're not specifically trained for people going to a shelter. We offer shelters, but we connect with our homeless navigator, and she's kind of the one that can organize if there was a shelter available. And most of the shelters, especially in Sac County, have wraparound care. They have, the doctors and clinicians there. So hopefully, if we can get somebody experiencing homelessness to a shelter, hopefully they will stay. We can't, force them to go or stay, but hopefully, they'll get there and get whatever services they need, and hopefully it'll be successful. If not, they might be back in the same location, the same spot the next day, but unfortunately, we just can't force anybody to go anywhere, but we do our best and to try and offer what we can. I hope that answers your question.
Darren, you are on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Officer McHugh. Looks like our next question is for our CCSD fire. Can you speak about campfires and cooking fire versus cooking fires, especially along creek areas?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes, Chief Quiggle, continue.
Yep. Hi, my name is Dan Quiggle. I'm a deputy fire chief here with the Casumna CSD Fire Department. With regards to cooking fires and campfires, our personnel are trained to address those from a fire prevention and hazard perspective. It's most common that we get called to fires that are out of control, that those have spread to the grass or to trash or to become something larger than a cooking or what we might call a campfire. In an instance like that, where there's a safety risk to people and property, we'll extinguish the fire completely. We'll put everything out and we'll remain at the scene until it's no longer smoldering or a danger to spread the fire any longer. It's rarer that we would wind up at something like a campfire or a cooking fire. Those do happen on occasion. People see smoke or they see flame, and our personnel are trained to assess the situation. And if, like we would on a private property, if someone has a contained small fire that they're using for cooking or for warmth that is not posing a hazard to the space around it or to others or to property, it's possible to allow such a small fire to remain. But it's really a case-by-case basis on whether or not we think there's a risk to the individuals or to the property in the area of that fire spreading. For example, something as small as a campfire with a stone ring around it on a normal evening might not get put out, but on a 20-mile-per-hour windy day, a fire like that's going to get extinguished. We find that if our personnel take their time to explain to people what's going on and what the risks are to them and to others, we often get their understanding if we need to put a fire like that out. I hope I answered your question.
Thanks, Chief Quiggle. Our next question, are there any nonprofit groups providing temporary shelters in Elk Grove?
So we have historically had our Elk Grove Heart nonprofit group that provided a temporary shelter in the winter months. It was called Winter Sanctuary, and it rotated amongst churches for a week each winter. The intake was always at Elk Grove United Methodist, and then folks were transported to a different church each week, which provided overnight accommodations. They provided bedding and a hot dinner and a breakfast the next morning before folks were transported back to the Elk Grove United Methodist Church. Unfortunately, during COVID, they were not able to offer that winter sanctuary anymore due to some health considerations, including that most of their volunteers tended to be seniors. And so there were some extra special considerations there. They switched last year to providing some shelter in place accommodations, so providing warm weather clothing and sleeping bags and tents, and as well as daily meals. And so this year they are working with another nonprofit to continue some of the shelter in place strategy and also do sort of a scaled back version of the winter sanctuary program that focuses on weather events. And so we would be opening shelters and warming centers when the forecast is rainy or cold or I believe windy. And so they're continuing to participate in that effort, but certainly other shelters are necessary, and we can sometimes have access to ones that are in Sacramento City or Sacramento County for our residents.
Thanks, Sarah. Our next question: what discussions/actions within the city of Elk Grove have been had about emergency housing?
Yeah, so the answer to this one is somewhat similar to the answer I gave for the last question. So emergency housing is, we are continuing to look at what partnerships we can have on some shelter options. And additionally, we have a motel voucher program available. We funded that during COVID, and we've continued to fund that. That is available through our partnerships with Sacramento Self-Help Housing and our Homeless Navigator and with Elk Grove Heart. And so in situations where we have someone who is vulnerable, generally that would be seniors or people with other medical conditions, or we serve a lot of families this way as well, families with children. We can put them in a motel while waiting for a vacancy at either one of our transitional housing projects or one of the county-run shelters. And so we plan to continue the motel voucher program this winter, as well as have the warming centers and continue to work with Elk Grove Heart and hope that they'll be able to have their shelter program run in future years.
All right, thank you, Sarah. We're on our last questions that's being showed in the question and answer box. Just a reminder, if you have a question, go down to the Q&A icon located at the lower end of your screen. The question is, what is the average duration of an individual's homelessness in Elk Grove? What solutions are available to those who do not have income or are unable to transition to longer-term housing? Is Elk Grove partnering with nonprofits to address solutions for this group?
So as far as the second part of that question, I believe Sarah just answered that with our partnerships with Heart and the various church organizations within the community. But the average duration of individuals' homelessness, that's kind of a little bit of a loaded question on that, because we'll have people that will pass through our city that we may contact today but never see tomorrow. There will be people that are just recently become homeless and are immediately able to get into meetings with our navigator and find housing. And then there's other people that are experiencing homelessness like we saw in the video at the beginning of this presentation that are homeless for many years, or like the gentleman was homeless for 5 years. We have several subjects that have been experiencing homelessness for the last decade. There's somebody in particular that's been homeless for 14 years. Since my partner has been in Elk Grove, she's been interacting with him. And some of the barriers to addressing some of these issues, especially some of the longer term residents of the city that are experiencing homelessness, are they may have accepted a resource 5 years ago and then not followed through. And so we keep trying, and finally we'll kind of get through, and they'll be going to housing or whatnot and decide not to follow through because the house has an electric stove versus a gas stove. And they went from living underneath a bridge, and they'd rather go back under the bridge than have a gas or a electric stove. So those are some of the barriers that we have to kind of overcome, and continually meet with these subjects and try to convince them otherwise that we're trying to better their situation and help them out. But every person is different. Every person's scenario is very unique. So there's no real timeline for the duration part of that question.
I'll jump in a little bit on some of the solutions that are available for people who don't have income or who have trouble transitioning to more permanent housing. And for that, regionally and nationally, there's a type of housing called permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing is really meant to be operated under what's called a housing first model. So it's giving people housing and then giving them the services to work through issues that they might be having, such as substance abuse or mental health issues. Recognizing that it's really hard to work on those issues when you don't know where you're going to sleep at night. If you go to your mental health appointment, you might come back and all of your belongings could be gone. And so giving people housing gives them that stability in order to work through those issues. So permanent supportive housing is allocated it's done at the county-wide level, and there's permanent supportive housing projects throughout the county. Those are filled through a process called coordinated entry. And so we participate in coordinated entry through our navigator. So people who are hoping to get on the list for housing are assessed according to a scale that considers their vulnerability. And that those that are deemed most vulnerable are most likely to be housed. Unfortunately, with permanent supportive housing, we don't see a lot of turnover in it. The rents are set at 30% of a person's income. So if a person has no or very little income, they would pay virtually nothing for rent. And so we don't see a lot of turnover in those units, and we don't have enough of them. And what we've seen in Elk Grove over the last 10 years that I've been doing this is that the number of people we have experiencing homelessness is relatively small proportion of the countywide total. And usually our folks don't rise to the top of that vulnerability scale. And so it can be hard to get them in there. One of the things that we've done to try and increase housing opportunities for people experiencing homelessness is to, on our new affordable housing projects, have the developers have a preference for that. And that preference means that households that can otherwise meet the criteria for being housed, so they can pass the credit and criminal background check, basically, it can get some priority to get into that affordable housing. And interestingly enough, what we found in our community is that not all folks experiencing homelessness, especially our families, need units at the lowest income. We have a lot of families who have ended up becoming homeless who are at the 50% or 60% of area median income even. And so through those partnerships with our developers, we are able to move those folks through more quickly to housing and permanent housing. And you saw one of those families at the beginning of the presentation in the video tonight. So we are looking at kind of some strategies for both sides, for those folks experiencing homelessness who have income and just can't find housing. We want to expand the housing stock for them. And then at the other end, for people who have been homeless over the long term, who don't have any income, we're trying to get them some Social Security disability income so they'd have something that they could use and make sure that they're on the list for permanent supportive housing if they could possibly qualify for that.
Thank you, Sarah. We had a couple questions come in. Is the city currently considering dedicating / raising additional revenue for affordable housing?
Yes, so the city currently has an affordable housing fee that is charged on all new residential and non-residential development in the city. For non-residential development, it's typically charged on a square footage basis. For residential development, we have a fee for new single-family housing and a different, slightly lower fee for new multifamily housing. And we put that into the Affordable Housing Fund, and that is what we use in order to subsidize new projects. And so within the next year or two, we will be revisiting that fee to look at whether that impact fee is set at the right level. And then we also are looking at some of the options through the state to try to see if there are grant opportunities or opportunities for some additional revenues for affordable housing. And of course, we support our affordable housing developers in their pursuit of funding. A lot of funding for affordable housing is available to developers, but not to, say, a city that doesn't have a specific project. So we try to support those folks who are actually planning to build a project in their pursuit of funding.
Thanks, Sarah. Just a quick resource from Noel. Thank you, Noel. Info regarding duration of homelessness can be found at through the continuum of care. Check out, I'm assuming, the website of Sacramento Steps Forward. So thank you for that resource. What appears to be our final question: what is being done to address folks with criminal backgrounds, evictions? What housing is available to them?
So that can be a tough population to house. However, we do work with a number of landlords through our partners, through Sacramento Self-Help Housing and other partners, to try and connect folks with landlords that are willing to consider those situations, and that includes, both properties within Elk Grove and properties outside of Elk Grove. Sometimes we want people to be housed, whether it ultimately is in our city or somewhere else. Stable housing matters more than the jurisdiction. But one thing that we're looking at for folks with evictions specifically is looking at how we can resolve that debt. So often what landlords look at is that someone owes debt to a previous landlord. And that's true of our affordable housing as well. A surprising thing about evictions is many people who think that they've been evicted have actually not. They've received a 3-day pay or quit notice, and they moved out because they don't have the money to pay the rent. And when you're interviewing people, a lot of people will tell you they've been evicted, but when they actually pull their credit report, they weren't. But they may owe money to a previous landlord because they didn't pay their rent. but didn't go all the way through the eviction process. And so for those folks, for folks in that situation, or folks who actually have evictions and owe money to previous landlords, getting that debt wiped out will often help them to qualify for housing going forward. And so one of the things that we're really planning to work on over this next year, in partnership with a Civic Spark Fellow through the Local Government Commission, is looking at landlord incentive programs. Are there incentives that we can provide to landlords that would make them more willing to rent to tenants that we think that may have some of these adverse circumstances? And is there education that we can provide to tenants to make sure that they will be good tenants going forward? And so those two pieces are something that we're really going to spend, a little bit of time exploring and try and take advantage as new housing comes online, as housing availability hopefully improves here in the next few months, to try and get some more folks into housing, including those who may have some more challenging backgrounds.
Thank you, Sarah. Just got a shout out for a thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Carrie. Good segue into thank you for the attendees. Hopefully this presentation was beneficial, educational to you. I do want to shout out to my staff, PD staff, CCSD, Parks and Fire staff for their, coordination of this presentation. It's definitely a comprehensive and educational presentation, and what is sometimes a difficult and controversial subject. So thank you, staff. Seeing no questions, I will go ahead and adjourn this town hall and wish everyone a good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.